A very good Friday to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining us today in our study in the Judges. My name is Nick Angel, and joining me as always is my good friend Alan Seenestrang. We are surviving the wintry weather here in Jackson, Tennessee, and we are happy to be able to study with you today from the book of the Judges. Chapter 14 is where we're going to be today as we continue walking through the Samson saga that is found, that brings a culmination to the story of the individual judges within this text. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope that God will bless us in our study together. Alan, it's good to see you, and I hope that you're ready to get into the story of Samson. Really tells us about who Samson is. We talked on Tuesday about the promise that Samson had about him, that he was spoken of, and the details surrounding his birth really gave us the opportunity to believe that he was going to be a really special guy, a very faithful servant of the Lord as a Nazirite. And yet we're going to get into his story here, and literally within the first verse, the first sentence even, we're going to see a bit of the flaw within his character. But there are going to be some things that we can learn from this text. And thank you for joining us today, and I hope that everybody's doing well, that you have a Bible, and that you'll pop it open and join us here within the text. Alan, I'll let you go ahead and take over in that first verse and give a little detail about where we find ourselves following the birth of Samson at the end of chapter 13 and what we find him doing as his story ensues.
We're told that Samson's from the tribe of Dan, and let's see. I forgot. Can I do a? Let's see if you can. I guess you can circle. You can do the circling. So Dan is that orange, very small orange area there, just north of Judah. And we mentioned how the history of the tribe of Dan is they eventually kind of get pushed out of that area.
They come up here.
And they come up, if you notice, way at the very top is a city, the city of Dan, which that'll be famous later as one of the cities that Jeroboam puts one of his idols in when the northern kingdom splits from the south. So not a great history for the tribe of Dan, and it kind of begins right here. We're told that Samson goes down to Timnah, which you'll notice Timnah right on the southern portion of Dan. Seems like it's kind of he's going to a Philistine city. So Timnah is an area of the Philistines. So you see how far reaching their cities are. Those coastal cities, Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod, those are famous. They'll be mentioned many times throughout the history of the Philistines. And he's from Zorah, so very, very close there. That little arrow, maybe, what are we talking about? Maybe 10 miles, not too far. But this whole coastal area is very flat, coastal plain area. It's the modern day Gaza Strip we know of today, but this is the area of the Philistines. So it mentions he goes down to Timnah, which I think probably has two meanings. I think the center region of Israel is more highly elevated. Think Jerusalem up on a mountain. These are if not a mountain area, then a very tall elevation, and then as you go closer to the seas, you go down in elevation quickly. But he goes down to Timnah, and it seems like every time it kind of mentions he goes down to a Philistine city, which I think that's no mistake. I think of Jonah. Throughout the book of Jonah, he's constantly heading downward. He goes down to the coastal, to the port, goes down into a boat. He goes down into the bottom of the boat. He goes down into the bottom of the sea and the belly of the fish. He's always, and as to highlight that, he's always heading away from God. And right off the bat, we're kind of seeing that with Samson. He's heading away from his people. And where is he going? He's going to the Philistines. And so he's just, he's never really heading toward God, heading toward his potential, heading toward, heading toward maturity. He's just always going the opposite direction, heading toward trying to get out of Israel, trying to become a Philistine, trying to, marry or be with a yet another Philistine woman. And that that direction, even though God's going to use him to punish the Philistines. You see the direction his life is going, and it makes sense why his story is so tragic.
Yeah, that whole idea of Samson being, though he is an Israelite, becoming like a Philistine is exactly what we've been talking about throughout the entirety of the Judges story. Is that Israel, instead of remaining Israel and sanctifying themselves and setting themselves apart from the people of Canaan, they continue to become more and more like the people of Canaan, which is a very sad reality for the people, considering what they should have been and who they should have been in the eyes of God. As you mentioned, verse 1 of chapter 14 says that Samson went down, though he is moving east to west, he's still going down in elevation to Timnah, and he saw a young Philistine woman there. He went back and told his father and his mother. He said, I have seen a young Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife. But his father and mother said to him, can't you find a woman among your relatives or among any of our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines for a wife? But Samson told his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. Now, I want us to notice here, what's driving Samson? It's not his place as a servant of God, but he is simply seeing something, he's liking it, and he is very let's see, there's a word I'm thinking of. He is just instinctually going for him. There is not much consideration of the reality of what this is going to mean, of him marrying into the family of the Philistines, which is something that his parents recognize. His parents asked her, Alan, can't you find a young woman among your relatives or among our people? Why do you have to go to these people? Yet you have why. You have the reason why here on the screen.
I switched over. The CSB doesn't state it this way. I like the ESV for this one, and I think several of the other translations say this, because this should trigger our memory pretty well. For she is right in my eyes. Think about how often it says he saw one of the daughters. Verse 2, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Get her for me. She is right in my eyes. His focus is what he sees, and not and how's that worked out? How did that work out for Eve in the garden? How did that work out for her and Adam? They saw that the fruit was good, it was pleasing to the eyes. This is just a blatant temptation for him, and one that he will continue. This isn't going to be the last time that he sees a daughter of the Philistines, a woman of the Philistines, and goes into her and wants her in this way. He's clearly just thinking about his carnal pleasures here and worldly pleasures, and not worried about his the vow that he's supposed to have, this Nazirite vow, remaining pure, dedicated, clean, dedicated to God. It's no wonder the trouble he gets into with a mindset like this. And he's even warned. It's so sad. He's warned by his father and mother. Why don't you get a wife from the daughters of your relatives? Why must you go to the wife of these uncircumcised Philistines? It's not just that they were not a Jew; it's because they were uncircumcised. These are wicked people. They should not be, and we should not be intermarrying with them. That's littered throughout the law of Moses. But we kind of see a little bit of the bigger picture happening here. Verse 4 says, his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines, because at this time they ruled over Israel. This wasn't just a regional pest. This was their masters at this point. And and the Lord is going to use not that he's he wants Samson to, I don't think he wants to do it this way, but his will is going to be done, even if Samson goes about it the wrong way.
The word I was thinking of is the word impulsive. He was very impulsive in his behavior. He saw her, he desired her, he wants her, and he's going to get her. That's the way he's thinking. I see it, I want it, I'm going to get it. Really, what we see here within Samson is a failure in so many ways to be who he was. I don't know this is the best terminology for it, but who he was bred to be. He was bred to be a servant. He was brought into this world to be a servant of God. And instead, what we're seeing is him being nothing more than a servant of himself. He is a servant to his own desires. And we see that as we go throughout the text. Verse number 5 says that Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. And suddenly a young lion came roaring out at him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him. He tore the lion apart from it with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat, but he did not tell his father and mother what he had done. And then he went and spoke to the woman because she seemed right to Samson. There you go, exactly what you're highlighting from the CSB. He seemed right to her. He was impulsive. He saw her, wanted her. He's going to get her. Then after some time, verse 8, when he returned to marry her, he left the road to see the lion's carcass, and there was a swarm of bees with honey in the carcass. He scooped some honey into his hands and ate it as he went along. And when he came to his father and mother, he gave some of them and they ate it, but he did not tell them that he had scooped the honey from the lion's carcass. Notice three things here that show that he's not living up to his destiny, we might call it that, as a servant of God. Number one, he's serving himself. He's seeking for somebody he simply wants, even though they're outside the nation of Israel. He is inviting trouble into his life. He's not serving God, he's serving himself. Number two, he's messing around in vineyards. He's not supposed to have anything to do with anything concerning the vine, yet we see him doing that here. And I believe we'll see it again later on in the wedding feast that he's going to participate in. But then we also see him, after he kills this lion, returning to the scene of this incident and coming in contact with the carcass. So in three ways, from him not being a servant of the Lord as he ought to be, from him participating in things that involve the vine, which he was not to do as a Nazirite, and to him then coming in contact with this carcass, which a Nazirite is not to do, we see him simply failing in so many ways to be who he is supposed to be. And we know, here's the thing, I believe we know who, we know that he, I believe we know that he knows this isn't who he ought to be, because he hides the reality of where this honey comes from to his parents. He doesn't tell them about it, which in doing so would have made them unclean as well. And he just doesn't seem to care at all, Alan.
I was going to say they knew what the Nazirite vow entailed. And I mean, the wife was specifically, his mother was specifically commanded to avoid, certain things while she was pregnant with him. So she had to live in that same way for a time. And so they would have known, what would have made them unclean and what would have violated that vow. So that's why he didn't see them. I love these different phrases, seeming, how she seemed right to Samson, and she's the right one for me. Back in verse 3, she was right in his own eyes. This is really, I think we'll see, is going to be the theme of Judges, pretty much the rest of the book, to the point where the book ends with this verse, and at the end of the book of Judges, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him, or right in their own eyes. So he is really just a product of his time here. This whole book of Judges, that's really what we've seen this whole time. They're just doing what's right in their own eyes, not what's right according to the law of Moses, according to God's law, what's right according to his commands. People are just doing their own thing, and I mean, look how far down it's gotten them. Look how all the trouble that this is going to cause Samson, and not even just Samson, his region, his people later on. His mother and father are going to have issues. And even this young woman that he so loved and desired is going to, and her family, are going to pay the price for just all of this later on. So he's doing his own thing. He doesn't care about anyone else except himself. And, he's leaving destruction in his wake.
Yeah, and I'll take this opportunity just to tie in what we see as the literary structure of Judges I'll highlight real fast, Alan, the let's see here, the visual that Kenneth Way gives in his here it is in his commentary on the book of Judges, where the differing judges, how they correspond and contrast with one another. Here, whenever we look at Samson, he corresponds with Othniel, and think of all the different ways that he corresponds to him, both positively and negatively. How he compares and contrasts. There's a contrast here that shows the positive nature of Judah, the tribe of Judah, and the fact that they did well through Othniel to bring about saving of the people after they had made the mistake in sinning with the gods of the pagans. But contrast that with the negative story here of Dan. And Judah was seen as one of the strongest of the tribes. Then Dan, as you mentioned earlier, did not even have a place to live because they allowed themselves to be driven out. So here's a contrasting element. We'll notice as well that this is Samson here seeking a wife from among the Philistines, the pagans, whereas Othniel seeks a wife from within the people of Israel themselves in Oxa. Think about the good figure that we see Othniel as being. He's a very, very positive figure. He starts off the series of the Judges very well, and yet we're seeing very quickly here the negative type of moral character that Samson has within this study. And yet, what I want us to see, and what you just highlighted, Alan, is that even with all of the deficiencies that we see with Samson, how he is a product of his times, and how his life, how his own life really patterns who Israel was at this time, how Samson embodies Israel of his day. Yet what do we see? We see the Lord still using him, the Lord using him to bring about his own purposes. And I think that's one of the underlying things that I hope we recognize from this text, is that God uses, and we've seen this throughout Judges, God uses flawed people, and sometimes even very flawed people, to bring about his purposes and to accomplish his plans. Pick up in verse. Go ahead.
And how does God use Samson? We'll see. Yes, he's a deliverer and he judges Israel, but he doesn't complete anything. He's not going to completely destroy and deliver them from the Philistines, but God is using him to punish and begin to save them from the Philistines. I think that has more to do with God wanting to punish that people than maybe God wanting to save Israel, if that makes sense. They kind of like how when Joshua led the people into the land of Canaan, God told him, it wasn't because you are so righteous that I'm doing this. It's because these people are so wicked, and I'm using you to punish them, to get them out of here and destroy them. It has nothing to do with you. You're my people, but you're definitely not, you didn't earn this at all. Samson's the same. He doesn't earn anything. He's just a tool that God is going to use because of these wicked Philistines.
Yeah, and we have to take a step back from it as well, Alan, and remember the grand picture of what we're seeing here within the Judges. This is still the Lord using this people to bring about his purposes, the ultimate purpose in the Messiah. And that it is through these people that he has to preserve them and bring them to the point that they can produce the Messiah through this particular lineage, which is why the Lord continues to show his favor. They are his special people. They have a special role to play, and he is going to use them, even though, again, they're flawed in this moment, to not only bring about judgment against the pagans, but he also has to do so for the purpose of bringing about the Christ. But that doesn't mean that they do well all along the way, as we see in verse number 10, that his father went to visit the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, as young men were accustomed to do. And when the Philistines saw him, they brought 30 men to accompany him. "Let me tell you a riddle," Samson said to them. "If you can explain it to me during the 7 days of the feast and figure it out, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you can't explain it to me, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And they replied, "Tell us your riddle. Let's hear it." So he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." After 3 days, they were unable to explain the riddle. And on the fourth day, they said to Samson's wife, "Persuade your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we will burn your family's house to death. Did you invite us here to rob us?" So Samson's wife came to him weeping, and said, "You hate me and you don't love me. You told my people the riddle, but haven't explained it to me." And he said, "Look, I haven't explained it to my father and mother, so why should I explain it to you?" Not a good thing to say, husbands. Just real quick there. Maybe not the best thing to say.
There's a couple good things that we should never say to our wives in this chapter.
Yeah, that would probably be one of them. So she wept the whole 7 days of the feast, and at last on the seventh day he explained it to her because she had nagged him so much. We can laugh at that now because Valentine's Day is past. And then she explained it to her people. And on the seventh day before sunset, the men of the city said to him, "What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion?" So he said to them, "If you hadn't plowed with my young cow," or Alan's favorite, "with my heifer, you wouldn't know my riddle now." And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men. He stripped them and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. And in a rage, Samson returned to his father's house, and his wife was given to one of the men who had accompanied him. Let's just say the honeymoon is not going very well for Samson at this moment. Also, a highlight here, Alan, that this feast that's being prepared here, that Samson is participating in, historically speaking, probably would involve some alcohol, which again shows us that he's not living up to the standard that he was destined to live up to as a Nazarite. And yet we have just continued issues here. And much of the issue, I think we can understand, stems from the fact that here we find Samson, an Israelite, spending a whole lot of time with the enemy. And a lot of the conflict here, I believe, stems simply from the fact that they were at odds with one another, that the Philistines were oppressing the Israelites, and it just was not a good relationship. Yeah, what other insights do you have here in the text, Alan, that can help us to see what's going on here within this particular text?
Some of the stuff that's kind of interesting here is the some of the customs that we see. These are not typically Israelite customs. Um, the the feast and the especially like the riddles, that seems to be something that's more Philistine. So you're just adding to the fact that Samson is trying to assimilate himself into the culture and the family of the Philistines instead of the other way around, or not at all, as it should have been with Samson. He should have been marrying another good, nice little Jewish girl and keeping that in the family. They were not supposed to marry women outside of the nation for the very reasons we see throughout their history. Those women usually had a negative influence on them. So the whole riddle thing doesn't make too much sense, except that was common for these types of parties and gatherings. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is just this 30 linen garments. You know, we don't think too much about clothes. We've all got, you know, hundreds of changes of clothes. You know, that's not a big deal. Go buy a shirt at Walmart or whatever, and it's right. You know, this isn't a big amount of money. Well, to them, they had usually one or maybe two changes of clothes back then. These were very expensive and very, very costly. I mean, they were probably the equivalent of maybe our vehicles. You know, some of us have at least one, maybe two vehicles in our household. They're, you know, big and expensive. You can't really have too many more of that. Well, changes of clothes were about the equivalent back then. They just didn't have 30 that many. So 30 of them, that was a big deal for Samson to be able to provide if he lost. But even for those 30 men, you know, that we need to provide one apiece. I mean, can you or I just give somebody a vehicle? That's a big expense. So that would have been, you know, it's no wonder that the stakes were so high, and they're pressuring the wife to the point where they're going to threaten to burn her. This kind of tells you the type of people that Samson is hanging out with. I mean, these are his buddies that were, you know, accompanying the party here, and they're threatening his in-laws and his wife, and they're, you know, if she doesn't tell them what the riddle means. So you understand a little bit why his wife acts the way she does, because she's got a, you know, death sentence on her head if she doesn't come through. Of course, she's also, you know, a Philistine as well, so she's kind of invited this on herself too. But it's interesting, she nags him. Samson's like, look, woman, I haven't even told my parents. Why am I going to tell you? But notice she weeps the entire week. I mean, obviously, this is supposed to be, this is not what he came for. We know what he came for. He didn't come, I don't think, because he loved this girl. He come because she was hot, and she's not very hot when she's crying all the time. Let's just say that. So that's not nearly as much fun for for your wedding feast and honeymoon and all that stuff. If your betrothed is crying all the time and nagging you about something. And it's so funny because if he just lasts 7 days and doesn't tell her, he's good. He wins. And he makes it to the 7th day in verse 17, and then he gives in. So he couldn't make it, 12 more hours or whenever it was. He couldn't make it just one more day. He put up with her for 7 days, but he couldn't do one more day. And he finally tells her, and I don't know what he expected to happen. I mean, clearly she's going to tell them, because that's the whole reason she's asking. She don't care about the answer. She just wants to not, have her family burned and her house burned down. And then you get probably one of my favorite statements in the whole Bible. If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't know my riddle. So yeah, don't put that on a Valentine's Day card for sure.
Well, mentioning that, Alan, him saying that, really Samson had set this whole riddle thing up to where he can't lose, because this really isn't a riddle, at least in a sense of you would somehow be able to figure this out. The only way to solve this riddle is to have experienced what Samson himself would experience, because it was very anecdotal. No, probably nobody else had experienced what he had done. And the fact that he had killed this lion, and then within its carcass, honey had come from. There was no way to figure that out. I like what Kenneth Way says. He says this was almost like the tails I win, heads you lose type of scenario. There's no way for him to lose this.
He stacked the deck. Yeah,
they had his wife who snitched on him, and it invites the first of 6 times now that Samson is going to seek vengeance on the Philistines in some way. And remember, we're going back to the whole purpose of this entire narrative of Samson. It was for him to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines, and that it was the Lord who was orchestrating all these things to take place to bring about these confrontations. Go back to chapter 14 that we're in, and verse number 4, that his father and mother did not know this was from the Lord, who wanted the Philistines to provide an opportunity for a confrontation, which is exactly what they have here. Because what does Samson do once his unbreakable riddle has been now found out? What does he do in verse 19, Alan?
Well, the Spirit of the Lord is part of the equation here, because this is the one part that the Lord is, I would say, I guess, happy about, because this is the purpose of Samson, is to go down and punish the Philistines. So he goes down, kills 30 men, and gets their clothing. But even at this point, like it's clear that just because the Spirit of the Lord is upon you, you're not. That doesn't make you righteous or good in any way, because he's in his rage. He's just this.
The impulses are flying again.
Impulsive, angry animal, basically. Just almost the same as that lion that he had killed. And then in verse 20, this will play out later in the next chapter, that his wife was given to one of the men who had accompanied him. So and it's interesting too to notice, like, this is his wife, even though we're talking about a 7-day marriage feast. It's they are husband and wife at this point. I would assume that they've even consummated, I think, during that time frame too. So
knowing Samson, even if it was not the proper thing to do, probably happens.
Yeah. So we tend, we have our one wedding day, and I now pronounce you husband and wife, and bam, that's the moment. They typically had these longer feasts,
The
and
betrothal
even
process.
yeah, it was a much longer betrothal process. But I think about Mary and Joseph
Mm-hmm.
later on. I mean, they had not had the wedding, but even though they were betrothed, he would, when he found out that she was pregnant, he was going to have to divorce her. That's what putting away. He would have had to divorce her at that point, even though they technically weren't, you know, they weren't married. They were married in the betrothal sense. I mean, that was the
Mm-hmm.
same for them, even if they hadn't actually, been together as husband and wife. So I mean, this was he basically left. I mean, he was married to her. He left, and then she's just given to someone else. So kind of obviously that'll play out later in the next chapter, but kind of interesting there. They didn't care that she was still married to him. They like, well, here we got this whole. We got all the party done. We had a party. I'm not going to do this again. The dad was probably just like, here, take one of you guys, take my daughter, and you marry her instead.
Right. Yeah, they're realizing very quickly that this Samson guy is just bad news. Whenever he's around, something bad is going to happen. But again, we need to trace that back to verse 4, where that was the whole reason that the Lord had brought this about, was so that he would have the opportunity through Samson to bring judgment upon the Philistines. Yet we're recognizing very quickly, Alan, within this chapter and within the story of Samson, a very unfortunate pattern. And the pattern is, number one, he's impulsive. He does what he wants to do. But number two, he's not living up to the standard that God has called him to live up to, especially and specifically as a Nazarite. He's not serving the Lord, he's serving himself. He's not abstaining from the vine, he's participating in it. And he is not avoiding carcasses, but he's actually eating from a carcass. And then we can, on top of that, instead of marrying within the family of Israel, he joins himself to a pagan people, which is only going to continue to cause issues, which should not surprise us considering the oil and water type of relationship that these people have had. So if we're going to take anything away from this for ourselves, number one, I would say don't be impulsive. Practice the fruit of the Spirit, which is self-control. Even though we might see something, we might desire something, if it's not ours to have, then we need not take it. But then also, I would encourage us to remember who we are. Samson didn't remember who he was as a Nazarite. He lived however he wanted to live as disciples. We are called to live to a high standard in serving our God, and that's what we need to do. We need to be living for his glory and not our own. Again, not flying by the seat of our pants, not living by our impulses, but living self-controlled lives before the Lord. Alan, we're going to be getting into Judges 15 this upcoming Tuesday. You got a little sneak peek you want to leave the audience with before we close out for today?
I don't want to give too much away, so
Well,
hopefully
hint, it's not going to be peaceful. We'll just give that hint.
It is this chapter is so interesting because and we'll see this in chapter 16 with Delilah. They pretty much the same scenario plays out again. He sees a girl that he likes, he goes down to her. At least this girl he tries to marry, and then with Delilah, he's gonna, she's gonna nag him to give up a secret, and he eventually does, and pays the price for it even more than here. So if you were hoping that you would at least not do the exact same thing over again, you're going to be disappointed because the same story happens in chapter 16.
Wisdom and proper judgments are not strong attributes in the character of Samson, to say the least. Yet there's so much that we can learn from here. Hope that this study has been good as far as giving deeper insight into the text for you. If you have any questions, please let us know. We'd love to think about these things further with you. Hope you have a great rest of your Friday. Hope that wherever you are, that you're staying warm, and hopefully things will turn out to where we can begin to travel and get out and about here soon. Just stay tuned to our Facebook page, the Pleasant Plains Church of Christ, or to our website, armorofgodonline.com, for any updates that we might have. concerning this weekend. But thank you so much for joining us. Hope that, again, you have a great rest of your Friday. God bless you in all that you do. Thank you for joining us on Walking Through History. The story of God's Word is found within the Bible. We'd love for you to join us this upcoming Tuesday as we continue walking through the Samson saga in Judges 15. Take care. God bless. And we'll talk to you soon.